When 12,000 pounds of spoiled apples came rolling down the mountain road and buried Della Morrow's farm beneath a rotting red tide, the whole town came out to watch. Some covered their noses, some laughed. Merritt Fane, the manager of the largest produce company in 3 counties, stood beside his polished motorcar and smiled as though he had arranged a parade. Then he looked at Della's broad body, her faded dress, and the mud sinking around her heavy boots. "A woman built like you ought to know when the ground has had enough weight on it," he called. The men near the fence laughed louder. Della did not answer. She stared at the apples crushing her winter cabbage, breaking her irrigation ditches, and piling against the little house her dead husband had built with his own hands. That afternoon, no neighbor came to help her. By sunset, Della was alone among the flies and the sour smell of ruin. Then, just as the mountain shadows swallowed the valley, a tall stranger stepped out of the forest and picked up one of the spoiled apples. He turned it slowly in his scarred hand, breathed in its scent, and said, "These were not dumped because they were worthless." Della looked at the feared mountain man named Ansel Greve and felt something colder than the evening wind move through her. "Then why were they dumped?" she asked. Ansel lifted his eyes toward Merritt Fane's distant cannery and answered in a voice so quiet she almost missed it. "Because someone wants your land more than they want the fruit." Della Morrow was 38 years old, widowed for 3, and tired in ways sleep could not cure. She had a broad, expressive face that never learned how to hide grief. Her deep brown eyes showed every sleepless night, every unpaid bill, and every memory she carried alone. Her dark hair was usually braided into 2 heavy ropes and pinned behind her neck, though loose strands were always escaping around her temples. Her dresses had been repaired so many times that every seam looked like a small history. One patch came from her husband Caleb's old work shirt. Another came from the blue curtain that had hung in their first kitchen. The hem of her brown Sunday dress had been replaced with cloth from a flour sack, because there had been no money for anything else. Della was large-bodied, strong through the shoulders, and heavy in the hips. In another life, in another town, those things might have meant nothing. In Bellwether Valley, they meant people felt invited to speak about her, as though she were not standing near enough to hear. The farm rested high in the western mountains where the land flattened briefly, between 2 pine-covered ridges. It was not rich land, but Caleb Morrow had loved it. He used to say the soil was stubborn because the mountain had not decided whether it wanted to grow fruit or stone. Together, he and Della had planted apple trees along the southern slope. They dug holes until their palms blistered and carried water in buckets during the first dry summer. When the young trees survived their first winter, Caleb kissed Della beneath the smallest one and told her they had made something that would outlive them. The tree outlived him. Caleb died after a fever that came in spring and took him before the first blossoms opened. There had been no dramatic final speech. No perfect goodbye. One morning he asked Della to open the window because the room smelled too much like medicine. By evening he could no longer speak. Before dawn his hand went still inside hers. The farm had been quiet ever since. Della kept working because work was the only thing that did not ask her how she felt. She pruned the trees, mended fences, carried feed, cleaned the barn, and learned to repair tools Caleb had once handled without thought. When the mortgage notices arrived, she folded them and placed them in the tin box beneath her bed. Each one was more urgent than the last. The orchard had to produce well that year. If it did not, the bank could take the farm by winter. For months, Della had counted every growing apple as though it were a coin hanging from a branch. The harvest had been the best she had ever seen. The apples were red and firm, sweet near the skin and sharp near the core. Della hired 2 local boys for 3 days and picked the rest herself. She worked from dawn until moonrise, climbing ladders that bent beneath her and carrying baskets that made her arms shake. By the end, the barn was filled with nearly 12,000 pounds of fruit. The Bellwether Produce Company had agreed in writing to purchase the whole harvest. Merritt Fane had signed the contract himself. He arrived on a grey Monday morning with 6 wagons, 12 workers and a clerk holding a black ledger. Merritt was a narrow man, with silver at his temples and carefully trimmed nails. He dressed like a person who expected dirt to move out of his way. He walked through Della's barn, lifted 2 apples, and cut one open with a small knife. He studied the white flesh for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Soft rot," he said. Della blinked. "There's no soft rot." Merritt cut another apple. It was clean. He frowned, as though the fruit had insulted him. "Internal blight," he said, "could spread through our storage rooms." Della picked up the apple. "Mr. Fane, this is sound fruit. You know it is." His clerk stopped writing. The workers looked at the floor. Merritt turned toward Della with a soft, patient expression that made her feel as though she were a difficult child. "Mrs. Morrow, farming is a complicated business. I have farmed this land for 15 years. With your husband," Della felt the words land. Merritt smiled slightly. "You may have carried baskets and baked pies, but that does not make you an expert in agricultural disease." Della looked past him at the workers. 2 of them had bought apples from her the week before. They knew the fruit was healthy. Neither spoke. "You signed a contract," Della said. "The contract allows rejection of contaminated goods." "They are not contaminated," Merritt sighed. "You are making this unpleasant. You are taking my whole year. I am protecting my company. You are stealing from me." The barn became still. Merritt's smile disappeared. He stepped close enough that Della could smell mint on his breath. "You should be careful with that word." Della held his gaze. "Then give me another one." For 1 second, something sharp moved behind Merritt's eyes. Then he smiled again. "Very well. We will remove the fruit as a courtesy. No charge for disposal." Della stared at him. "Remove it where? You need not trouble yourself. I asked where." Merritt turned away. "Load the wagons." The workers began moving the crates. Della stood between them and the barn door. "No." The first worker stopped. Merritt glanced back. Della spread her arms. "You do not touch this fruit unless you pay for it." A few of the men exchanged nervous looks. Merritt walked slowly toward her. "Mrs. Morrow, do not embarrass yourself." "I am not embarrassed. You will be." His words were quiet. Della did not understand what he meant until the wagons began moving. Instead of carrying the apples toward the company road, Merritt ordered the drivers to turn uphill. The wagons climbed above Della's southern field, where the farm road narrowed beside an old retaining wall. Then, one by one, the workers lifted the tailboards. The first load came crashing down. Hundreds of apples bounced across the road, struck the stones, and burst open against the field. The sound was strangely gentle at first, like heavy rain. Then another wagon emptied, and another. Red fruit rolled through the garden, filled the drainage ditch, battered the fence, and piled against the porch steps. Della ran uphill, shouting for them to stop. Merritt remained below beside his motorcar. By then, people from town had begun gathering along the fence. Someone must have sent word. The blacksmith came, the grocer came, several cannery workers came with their wives. Even people who had not spoken to Della since Caleb's funeral stood watching as the harvest thundered down the slope. Della reached the first wagon and grabbed the wooden sideboard. "What are you doing?" she cried. The driver would not meet her eyes. Merritt called from below. "Contaminated fruit must be disposed of. Not on my crops. You own the land. It seems the proper place." Another wagon released its load. Apples struck Della's legs and nearly knocked her down. She caught herself against the wheel. Her dress tore at the knee. Laughter rose from the fence. It was not everyone. It was only 2 or 3 men at first. But laughter had a way of giving courage to cowards. Soon more joined in. Della looked down toward them. Merritt stood in the middle of the ruined field, smiling. "Careful, Mrs. Morrow," he called. "That hill may not be strong enough for both you and the harvest." The laughter became louder. Della felt heat rise from her chest into her face. Merritt looked her up and down. "A woman built like you ought to know when the ground has had enough weight on it." A man near the fence bent over laughing. Someone said, Maybe she can eat her way out. Della recognized the voice. It belonged to Owen Pike, who had borrowed Caleb's plow after his own broke and returned it 3 months late. She looked for one kind face. She saw none. Even the people who did not laugh stared at the ground. Della climbed down from the wagon. An apple burst beneath her boot. Juice ran through the mud, like blood watered thin by rain. Merritt walked toward her. "Your payment is cancelled," he said. "Your debt at the company store remains due. I understand the bank also expects a mortgage payment next month." Della's throat tightened. "How do you know about my mortgage?" Merritt adjusted his cuff. "Businessmen speak to one another. You planned this. That is a serious accusation." "You planned every part of it." He leaned closer. "You should consider selling while the property still has value." "To you? To someone capable of using it?" Della's hands closed into fists. Merritt's eyes dropped to them. For one wild moment, she wanted to strike him. She wanted to wipe away his soft smile and make the whole valley understand that she could still cause pain. Then she saw the crowd watching. She understood what he wanted. One blow would turn him into the injured man and her into the dangerous widow who could not control herself. Della slowly opened her hands. Merritt smiled. "That is better." He stepped into his motorcar and drove away, while the final wagon emptied. By noon, the farm was buried. The apples lay 3 feet deep in parts of the lower field. They blocked the irrigation channel and crushed the last of Della's winter vegetables. Broken crates leaned against the chicken coop. The sweet smell of split fruit filled the air. The crowd drifted away. Not one person crossed the fence. Della stood alone until the clouds opened. Rain fell lightly at first, then harder. It struck the apples and turned the dirt beneath them into red-brown mud. Della began moving the fruit by hand. She lifted one apple, then another, tossing them into a wheelbarrow. The task was impossible, but she did not know what else to do. After an hour, her dress clung to her body. Mud covered her arms. Her breath came hard. A wagon passed on the road. The driver looked at her and kept going. Della continued until the wheelbarrow wheel sank and would not move. She pulled harder. The handle slipped. She fell to one knee among the apples. For several seconds, she remained there. Then something inside her gave way. She sat in the mud and began to cry. The sound frightened her. It did not feel like ordinary weeping. It came from somewhere deep and old, from the room where Caleb had died, from the empty chair at supper, from the mortgage notices beneath the bed, and from every time a person had looked at her body and decided it told them the whole story of her life. She cried until the rain became cold. Then she went inside. Caleb's work coat still hung from a peg beside the kitchen door. Della had never moved it. The brown wool had faded near the shoulders, and one sleeve still carried a dark stain from the summer he repaired the cider press. Della pressed the coat to her face. It no longer smelled like him. That hurt more than she expected. "I tried," she whispered. The house answered with the sound of rain on the roof. "I tried to keep it." Her fingers tightened around the coat. "You said we built something that would last." She sank into the chair beneath the peg. "I cannot do this alone, Caleb." Outside, something moved near the porch. Della lifted her head. At first, she thought it was a branch scraping the wall. Then came the slow creak of a boot on the step. She reached for the fireplace poker. The door stood partly open because the frame had swollen in the rain. A shadow crossed the threshold. "Stay outside," Della said. The movement stopped. Della gripped the poker with both hands. A man's voice came through the rain. "I mean you no harm. Men who say that usually do." There was a pause. "That has also been my experience." The answer was so unexpected that Della nearly lowered the poker. She moved toward the door and looked through the narrow opening. A tall man stood on the porch beneath the dripping roof. He wore a long, dark coat made from rough wool, muddy boots, and a weathered hat. His hair reached his collar, black with threads of gray. A pale scar ran from the edge of his right eyebrow toward his temple. His face was lean and tired. He looked neither young nor old. He looked weathered, like wood that had spent years beneath snow. Della knew him. Everyone in Bellwether Valley knew Ansel Greve. Children were warned not to follow him into the forest. Women lowered their voices when he entered the general store. Men who spoke loudly about courage became busy with their drinks whenever he appeared at the tavern. Years earlier, someone had accused Ansel of setting fire to a company warehouse near the northern pass. No one had proved it. No one had disproved it either. After that, he vanished into the mountains and returned only for salt, tools, and lamp oil. Della opened the door another inch. "What do you want?" Ansel looked past her toward the field. "To see the apples. You have seen them. To examine them." "They are rotten, no." His answer came too quickly. Della tightened her grip. "Mr. Fane said they were diseased. Merritt Fane says many things. You know him." Ansel's face changed slightly. "I know what he is." Della studied him. Rain ran from the brim of his hat. "Why should I trust you?" "You should not." Again, the answer surprised her. Ansel continued, "Not yet." Della looked toward the road. No one else was nearby. "You arrive after dark, walk onto my porch without invitation, and ask to touch the fruit that destroyed my farm. Yes, you have a strange way of making yourself welcome." "I have never been especially welcome." There was no self-pity in his voice. That made it sadder. Della lowered the poker a little. "What can you learn from the apples? Whether they were truly spoiled before they were dumped. They are crushed now. Not all of them." She hesitated. Ansel looked toward the trees, then back at her. "If I meant to rob you, Mrs. Morrow, I would have waited until you were asleep. That does not comfort me. It was not meant to." Della stared at him for a long moment. Then she set the poker against the wall. "You have 10 minutes." Ansel removed his hat before stepping off the porch. It was a small act of manners, almost old-fashioned. He walked into the rain and crouched beside the nearest pile. He chose several apples, cutting each with a narrow knife. He smelled the flesh, studied the seeds, and scraped the skin with his thumbnail. Della watched from beneath the porch roof. After several minutes, Ansel stood. These were good when they left the barn. Della folded her arms. "I knew that. They are beginning to spoil because they were broken and left in the rain, but the fruit itself was sound. That does not help me now." "Some can still be saved." Della gave a tired laugh. "Saved for what? I cannot sell bruised apples. I cannot store them. In 3 days, this whole place will smell like vinegar." Ansel looked at the ruined field. "Vinegar is one possibility." Della frowned. He picked up an apple and turned it in his hand. "So is apple butter, dried leather, spiced preserve, cider syrup, winter tonic. I have no equipment for any of that. You have an old press in the shed." Della's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" "I saw the wheel through the broken wall. That press has not worked in 8 years. It can work. The wood is split. It can be braced. The gears are rusted. They can be cleaned. The pressing cloth is gone. Canvas can be boiled." Della stepped down from the porch. "You speak as though you have already decided." "No." Ansel met her eyes. "I am telling you the fruit is not yet dead. What happens next is your decision." Della looked at the apples. Rainwater flowed around them in shining streams. "Why would you help me?" Ansel's expression became unreadable. "Because Merritt Fane wants you to believe there is nothing left." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I can give tonight." Della's suspicion returned. "Do you work for him?" Ansel went still. "No." "Have you ever?" "No." "Then why do you know so much about what he wants?" His eyes moved toward the distant cannery lights. "Because he has wanted the same things before." The wind shifted. The smell of crushed apples rose between them. Della thought of the mortgage. "How long do I have before the fruit cannot be used?" "Yes, 2 days for the damaged apples, 4 for the whole ones, perhaps 5 if the nights stay cold." "That is impossible." "Most things are, until someone begins." Della looked at him sharply. Caleb used to say something similar. Ansel seemed to notice the change in her face, though he did not ask about it. "I can return at first light," he said. "With tools." "With tools. And then, you choose what you are making." Ansel seemed to notice the change. Della looked again at the apples. I do not know how to make any of those things. I do. You said the decision must be mine. Knowledge is not a decision. The words settled quietly inside her. Della wrapped her arms around herself. If you steal from me, I will report you. To whom? She almost smiled despite herself. Ansel put on his hat. First light, he said. Then he walked into the forest and disappeared between the pines. Della slept less than an hour. Before dawn, she lit the stove and stood at the kitchen window. She expected Ansel not to return. Men often made promises to lonely women, because promises cost less than labor. At the first gray hint of morning, a mule emerged from the trees. Ansel walked beside it. The animal carried saws, iron braces, ropes, canvas, 2 copper kettles, and a wooden box filled with tools. Della opened the door. You own all that? Some of it? What does that mean? It means the rest will be returned before it is missed. She gave him a hard look. Ansel's mouth moved slightly at one corner. It was the first sign that he knew how to smile. They began with the press. The old cider shed stood behind the barn, half hidden beneath climbing vines. Caleb had bought the press during their 2nd year on the farm. For a few seasons they sold fresh cider in town. Then the main gear cracked, repair costs rose, and they turned to selling whole fruit instead. Ansel studied the machine in silence. Della stood beside him. Well, it is worse than you said. I appreciate the hope, but not beyond repair. They worked through the morning. Ansel removed the rusted gear and fitted an iron brace around the cracked wood. Della cleared the vines, hauled buckets, and scrubbed the pressing trays with boiling water. Neither spoke much. Near noon, Della noticed Ansel watching her carry a heavy beam. What? She asked. Nothing. You were staring. I was deciding whether to offer help. And I decided you would dislike the offer. You decided correctly. Ansel nodded and returned to the gear. There was no smirk in it, no challenge. He simply accepted her answer. Della realized how rare that was. By afternoon, the press wheel turned. It creaked like an old door, but it turned. Della placed both hands on it. Caleb's fingers had worn smooth places into the wood. She could still see them. Ansel stepped away. Take your time, he said. Della swallowed. I do not need time. You do. His voice was gentle, not soft. Della looked at the wheel for another moment. Then she pushed it forward. The press groaned awake. They sorted apples until dark. Whole fruit went into one pile. Bruised fruit went into another. The worst pieces were cut away and carried toward the compost trench. It was too much work for 2 people. Della knew it by midday. She knew it again when her lower back began to ache and her hands became sticky with juice. We need help, Ansel said. No one is coming. You have not asked. I watched them laugh yesterday. Not all of them laughed. The rest watched. Ansel cut a brown section from an apple. Fear makes cowards of ordinary people. That does not make it hurt less. No. He placed the clean fruit into the kettle. But it means cowardice is not always permanent. Della looked toward town. I will not beg them. Then do not ask the town. Who else is there? Ansel wiped his knife on a cloth. People Merit Fane has already thrown away. That afternoon, Della walked to the northern edge of the valley and knocked on the door of Inez Calder. Inez was 62, though she claimed age was a tool men used to decide when a woman should stop speaking. She was thin as a fence rail, with silver hair that escaped from every pin she used. She gathered herbs in the mountain meadows and sold remedies from a narrow house filled with drying plants. Inez opened the door and looked Della up and down. You smell like a barrel. I need help. That much is clear. Merit dumped my harvest. I heard. Did you hear the part where everyone laughed? I heard that too. Della looked away. Inez's expression softened. Come inside. I do not have time. Then speak. Della explained the press, the remaining fruit, and Ansel's ideas. At his name, Inez's eyebrows rose. You invited Ansel Greve onto your land. I did not invite him, he appeared. That is generally how he arrives. You know him. I know enough not to repeat what I do not know. Della frowned. That sounds like a riddle. It is simply uncommon good sense. Della took a breath. I need hands. I can pay nothing now. Inez leaned against the doorframe. And later? If we make anything worth selling, everyone shares. You are proposing a business. I am proposing that the apples do not win. Inez studied her. No, she said. You are proposing that Merit Fane does not win. Della did not deny it. Inez took her shawl from a peg. Those are better terms. They found Nola Vey in a rented room above the old feed shop. Nola was 27 and had been widowed less than a year. Her husband died in a logging accident that left the company apologetic, but not generous. She had pale skin, tired eyes, and auburn hair pinned so carefully that it seemed to be the one part of her life she could still control. When Della explained the plan, Nola sat very still. I do not know anything about cider, she said. Neither do I. I am not strong. You can sort fruit. My hands shake. They can shake while sorting. Nola looked toward the window. People will talk if I work at your farm with that man there. People already talk. They say he burned a warehouse. Do you believe them? Nola's mouth trembled. I do not know what I believe anymore. Della sat beside her. Nola, I am not asking you to trust Ansel. I am asking you to trust me for one day. Nola looked at Della's stained dress and swollen hands. What happens after one day? We decide about the next. Nola stood and reached for her coat. By sunset, 4 women and 1 mountain man were working beneath lantern light. Inez washed fruit with water and vinegar. Nola cut away bruises with careful, nervous hands. Della fed apples into the grinder. Ansel turned the repaired wheel while juice streamed into the waiting barrels. The first barrel filled near midnight. They gathered around it in exhausted silence. Golden brown juice shone beneath a layer of foam. Inez dipped a spoon and tasted it. Well? Della asked. Inez considered. It tastes like panic. Nola covered her mouth, but a laugh escaped. Della stared at Inez. Inez tasted again. And apples. Ansel leaned against the press. That is enough for the first night. Della looked at the barrel. It was not money. It was not safety. It was not even finished cider. But it was something made from the ruin. For the first time since the wagons arrived, she felt a thin line of hope. Over the next 3 days, the farm changed. Word did not spread because Della announced anything. It spread because smoke rose from the cider shed all night, and because people passing on the road heard the press turning long after dark. 2 more women came. One was Margaret Sloane, a stern widow who had lost her dairy lease after refusing to sell to Merit's company. The other was Clara Bell, 25, strong-armed, sharp-eyed, and recently dismissed from the cannery for asking why workers were required to sign blank inspection forms. Clara arrived carrying a hammer. I heard something needed fixing. Della looked at her. Who told you? Ansel. Della glanced toward the shed. Ansel was tightening a brace. You have been recruiting. I mentioned the work. You did not ask me. No. Della waited. Ansel looked up. I should have. It was not an excuse. It was an apology. Della's irritation cooled. Do not do it again. I will not. Clara lifted the hammer. Should I leave? Della looked at the young woman's worn boots and guarded face. No. We need shelves. Clara nodded once and went to work. They saved nearly half the apples. The damaged fruit became spiced apple butter, cooked slowly in copper kettles with cinnamon bark and mountain honey. Firmer apples were sliced and dried near the stove. The best juice went into barrels to ferment. Ansel taught them an old method, he said, came from families who lived beyond the northern pass. He added dried mountain berries to one batch, and a bitter root to another. What is that? Della asked. Gentian. Is it safe? In that amount? What if you are wrong? Then Inez will insult me while saving us. Inez looked up from her herbs. I would insult you first. Time matters. The work settled into a rhythm. For a few days, Della almost forgot Merit Fane. Then the first barrel failed. Nola noticed the smell. She lifted the cloth and stepped back. The cider had turned dark and bitter. A grey film covered the surface. Ansel examined it. Wild mold. Della stared at the barrel. How much? 40 gallons. She closed her eyes. 40 gallons meant hundreds of apples. Hours of labor. Firewood. Honey. Time they did not have. Can it be saved? No. Della struck the side of the barrel with her palm. Nola flinched. Della saw it and immediately lowered her hand. I am sorry. Nola looked at the floor. It was my barrel. No. I cleaned it. We all cleaned it. I must have missed something. Ansel bent near the barrel and scraped the rim with his knife. This was not poor cleaning. He held up a thin black residue. Inez smelled it. Lamp soot, mixed with salt. Della frowned. What does that mean? Ansel looked toward the door. Someone touched the barrel after we sealed it. The shed became silent. Clara crossed her arms. Who? No one outside knows which barrels are ready, Della said. Someone knows, Ansel answered. Della looked around the room. Inez met her eyes directly. Clara looked angry. Nola looked frightened. Margaret's face remained stern and still. Della felt shame for suspecting any of them. Ansel covered the barrel. We say nothing, he said. Della turned toward him. You do not decide that. His jaw tightened. No, I do not. She waited. Ansel corrected himself. My advice is that we say nothing. If someone is informing Merritt, accusing the wrong person will only help him. Della looked again at the women. What do we do with the barrel? Dump it? Inez said. Della swallowed. Then begin again. They carried the ruined cider outside. As it poured into the dirt, the smell rose sour and heavy. Nola began crying quietly. Della put an arm around her. It is not final, she said. The words surprised her. They had become something she needed to hear too. The next morning, a notice appeared on Della's gate. By order of the Bellwether County Sanitation Board, all food production on the Morrow property was suspended pending inspection. Merritt Fane arrived 1 hour later. He came with 2 county officers and a man named Judge Pell, who served as legal counsel for the produce company, and several members of the county board. Della met them at the fence. Merritt smiled. I understand you have begun manufacturing food without a license. We are preserving my own fruit. For public sale, we have not sold anything. Yet. Judge Pell opened a leather folder. Intent to distribute may be sufficient. Inez stepped beside Della. May be sufficient for what? To seize contaminated goods. Inez's eyes narrowed. Which goods are contaminated? Merritt looked toward the shed. That remains to be determined. Della saw Clara standing behind the barn with Ansel. At Della's glance, they stayed out of sight. She understood. Merritt had brought officers. Ansel's presence would give them an excuse to search the property. Della opened the gate. You may inspect the shed. Merritt looked disappointed by her calm. The officers examined the kettles, barrels, drying racks, and tools. Inez answered every question with exact details about boiling times, cleaning methods, and ingredients. Judge Pell seemed annoyed. Finally, one officer lifted the cloth from a fermentation barrel and smelled it. This appears clean. Merritt stepped forward. Check the others. They checked all of them. Ansel had already removed the spoiled barrel. There was nothing to seize. Judge Pell cleared his throat. The operation must remain closed until a permit is issued. How do we get one? Della asked. You file at the county office. I filed yesterday. Merritt turned sharply toward her. Della continued. Clara carried the papers. Judge Pell looked at Merritt. Merritt's smile returned slowly. Then I am sure the board will consider them. How long? 3 to 6 weeks. The fruit will not wait 3 weeks. Merritt spread his hands. Regulations exist for a reason. Della understood the trap. He had dumped the fruit, then used the law to make sure she could not save it. She looked at the county officers. Do either of you believe this is about sanitation? Neither answered. Merritt stepped close. Mrs. Morrow, this struggle is becoming undignified. She looked down at him. Only for you. His face tightened. You have no idea how quickly this can become worse. Della heard the threat beneath the calm words. She also noticed Nola watching from the kitchen window. Fear moved across the young widow's face. Merritt followed Della's gaze. Then he smiled toward the house. You have gathered quite a collection here. Widows, fired workers, women with nowhere useful to be. Della's voice became cold. They are standing on private land. For now. Merritt turned and walked back toward his motorcar. That afternoon, Ansel led Della into the forest. I cannot leave the farm, she said. You cannot preserve fruit there while the order stands. I will not hide like a criminal. You will not. He moved through the trees along a narrow path. Della followed reluctantly. Where are we going? To a place the county forgot. The path climbed for nearly an hour. Della's boots slipped on wet pine needles. Ansel slowed without commenting on it. When she stopped to catch her breath, he waited several yards ahead and pretended to study the sky. Della noticed. You may look at me, she said. Ansel turned. I was giving you privacy. I am breathing, not confessing. A faint smile touched his face. You have every right to breathe. They continued until the trees opened around an abandoned stone building built into the mountain. The roof had partly collapsed, but the lower rooms remained dry. A spring flowed nearby. Rusted hooks hung from the beams. What is this place? Della asked. An old preserving house. Whose? Ansel looked at the doorway. My family's. Della said nothing. He entered. Inside, sunlight fell through gaps in the roof. Stone shelves lined the walls. A narrow channel carried cold spring water through the floor. My father stored fruit here, Ansel said. My mother made syrups, vinegar, and winter preserves. Travelers came through the northern pass and traded for them. What happened? Ansel touched the edge of a stone shelf. Merritt's father wanted the pass road. Our land controlled the easiest route. Della felt a chill. They took it. They offered too little. My father refused. Then there were fines, claims of unsafe storage, accusations that our spring was contaminated. The same things Merritt is doing to me. Yes. What happened to your family? Ansel's hand remained on the stone. My father borrowed money to fight them. The lender sold the note to feign produce. One winter they came with a court order. And the fire? Ansel looked at her. The warehouse burned 2 nights after they took our land. Did you burn it? The question hung between them. Ansel did not look away. No. Della waited. He continued. My younger brother did. She drew a breath. He was 17. He thought the warehouse was empty. It was not. A night guard was inside. Della's stomach tightened. Was he killed? No. He escaped through a window, but his hands were badly burned. My brother ran into the mountains. He froze before I found him. The room seemed colder. Why did they accuse you? Because Merritt's father knew I would not name my brother, even after death. Della looked at the ruined roof. And your parents? My father died the next year. My mother left the valley. I am sorry. Ansel nodded once. Della studied him. You said you knew forgotten preservation methods. My mother taught me. And hidden roots. My father taught me. Why did you not use this place again? Ansel looked around. Some places remember too much. Della understood that. She thought of Caleb's coat. Why show it to me? Because Merritt knows every legal road in the valley. He does not know the old paths. You want us to move the operation here. I am offering the place. Della walked toward the spring channel. The water was clear and cold. If we hide production, he will call it proof of guilt. Then we do not hide it. Ansel handed her a folded paper. It was a copy of an old county map. The preserving house stood beyond the modern county boundary, inside land administered by the mountain territory. Merritt's order does not reach this ridge, Ansel said. Della looked at the map. You planned this. I considered it. You moved our clean barrels before the inspection. Yes. Without asking me. Yes. Anger rose in her. Ansel did not defend himself. I thought they would seize them, he said. I was almost certain. That does not give you the right. No. You keep deciding what danger I can handle. I am trying to stop him from taking what is yours. Then stop taking choices from me. The words echoed against the stone. Ansel lowered his head. You are right. Della's anger remained, but something in his face softened it. He had lost his family because men made choices over them, yet he had nearly repeated the same mistake while trying to protect her. Della unfolded the map on a stone table. "We move the operation here," she said, "but everyone knows where we are. No secrets." Ansel nodded. "And no decisions about my property without me." "Yes, and no threatening anyone." His eyes lifted. "I have threatened no one. You look like a threat while standing still. That has occasionally been useful. Not for this." Ansel considered. "Then I will try to look harmless." Della looked at his scar, his height, and the long knife at his belt. "That may be beyond your skills." This time, Ansel smiled fully. It changed his whole face. For the next 2 weeks, they rebuilt the preserving house. The women carried kettles and barrels through the old mountain route, using mules borrowed from Inez. Clara repaired the roof. Margaret organized supplies. Nola kept careful records of every apple, every jar, and every hour of work. Della made the decisions. They stopped calling the product cider because the early batches became something thicker, darker, and more valuable. By reducing the juice over low heat and blending it with mountain berries, honey, gentian, and wild herbs, they created a deep amber preserve that could be mixed with hot water, spread on bread, or used in cooking. Inez called it mountain preserve. Clara called it expensive apple mud. Nola designed a small label showing an apple tree growing from a stone ridge. Della named it Last Harvest. "Too sad," Margaret said. "It is not sad," Della answered. "It means what looks like the end can still become something." They filled the first 20 jars. Ansel carried 3 through the hidden pass to a railway hotel beyond Merritt's reach. The chef bought all 3 before tasting the second spoonful. A week later, he ordered 50. Hope returned carefully. Della did not trust it at first. She counted jars. She counted coins. She counted days until the mortgage payment. The numbers remained small, but they moved in the right direction. Then the rain came. It began at night and continued for 4 days. Mountain streams rose. The road to Della's farm disappeared beneath brown water. A section of the old pass collapsed, trapping 2 mules on the far side. At dawn on the 5th day, the retaining wall above the preserving house gave way. Della woke to Ansel pounding on the farmhouse door. "The lower room is flooding." She was dressed in 2 minutes. They reached the preserving house in heavy rain. Water rushed through the spring channel and spread across the floor. Barrels floated against the walls. Shelves leaned. Jars trembled near the edges. "Move the finished stock first," Della shouted. Everyone worked. Nola passed jars through the window. Clara and Margaret carried crates uphill. Inez saved the herbs. Ansel fought to clear the blocked channel with a shovel. The water rose to Della's knees. A shelf cracked. Dozens of jars tilted. Della threw her weight against the wood and held it upright. Clara splashed toward her. Together, they lowered the shelf, while Nola removed the jars one by one. A deep rumble rolled through the mountain. Ansel looked up sharply. "Out!" Della turned. The upper wall had begun to bow. "Everyone out!" she shouted. They ran through the doorway as part of the roof collapsed behind them. The sound shook the ground. For several moments, no one moved. Rain struck their faces. Nola sank to her knees. "All of it," she whispered. Della looked at the broken building. Mud covered the floor. One room had collapsed entirely. Several barrels were crushed, but the finished jars sat safely in crates above the path. "Not all of it," Della said. Nola began to cry. "I cannot keep doing this." Della knelt beside her. "I know. Every time we make something, someone destroys it. I know. My husband said we would have a house by spring. He said it the morning he died. People keep telling me to begin again. I am tired of beginning again." Della took Nola's cold hands. "You do not have to be brave every day." Nola looked at her through the rain. "Then what do I do today?" "Today you sit beside me for 5 minutes." Nola's face crumpled. Della held her. The others gathered close, not speaking. Ansel stood several feet away, soaked and breathing hard. He looked toward Della, as though he wanted to come nearer, but did not know whether he was allowed. Della reached out one hand. He took it. They sat in the rain while the preserving house groaned behind them. 5 minutes later, Della stood. "We save what we can." No one cheered. No music rose. They simply stood with her. Sometimes courage did not look like fire. Sometimes it looked like tired women lifting wet crates because the jars inside still mattered. They moved production back to Della's barn under a temporary county permit Inez obtained through an old friend. The permit had been approved quickly because the friend sent copies to a newspaper in the state capital. Merritt Fane came to the farm that evening. He did not bring officers. He came alone. Della met him beside the gate. "You have become troublesome," he said. "You dumped 12,000 pounds of apples on my land. They were rejected goods. You arranged for the county to stop us. I protect public health. You bought the note on my mortgage." Merritt's expression did not change. Della continued, "The bank clerk showed me the transfer. That was a private business decision. You plan to take the farm. You cannot pay. I will. You cannot." Merritt stepped closer. "The first payment deadline is in 9 days. Your little jars will not save you." Della held his gaze. "How do you know how many jars we have?" For the first time, Merritt hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but Della saw it. "So there is someone," she said. Merritt smiled. "There is always someone, Mrs. Morrow." "Who?" "You should worry less about betrayal and more about arithmetic." He leaned toward her. "Sell now. I will allow you to remain in the house through winter." "Allow me?" "As a kindness." Della looked back at the house Caleb built. Then she faced Merritt. "You mistake silence for surrender." "No. I mistake poverty for weakness. They are not the same. To men with money, they often are." He stepped away. 9 days. After he left, Della gathered everyone in the barn. "There is an informer," she said. Nola went pale. Clara cursed under her breath. Margaret's face remained still. Inez crossed her arms. Ansel stood near the door. Della placed the spoiled barrel residue on the table beside a copy of the mortgage transfer. Someone told Merritt which batch to ruin. Someone told him how many jars we had. No one spoke. Della looked at each face. "I am not going to search your rooms. I am not going to demand confessions. But from this moment, records stay locked. Orders are discussed only when everyone is present. No one meets Merritt alone." Margaret lifted her chin. "And if someone already has?" Della looked at her. "Then I hope she understands that fear is not a prison unless she keeps returning to it." Nola began trembling. Della noticed. So did Ansel. Nola's breath became shallow. "I need air," she whispered. She hurried outside. Clara moved to follow, but Della stopped her. "I will go." Della found Nola behind the barn, gripping the fence. "Nola!" The young woman shook her head. "Do not." Della stood beside her. Rainwater still filled the ruts in the field. Nola stared at them. "He came to my room." Della's heart sank. "When?" "Before I joined you." "Merritt?" Nola nodded. "He said the logging company owed him money. He said my husband had signed papers before he died. I never saw them." "What did he want?" "At first, nothing. He asked questions. Then he said, if I worked with you, I could tell him what you were making." Della's voice became very quiet. "What did you tell him?" "The barrels, the first order, the permit." Della looked away. Nola began crying. "I did not know he would ruin the cider." "You told him which barrel?" "He asked whether the mountain berries were in every batch. I said no. I said the best batch was near the back wall." Della closed her eyes. "He said if I stopped helping him, he would take my wages for the debt. He said he could have me arrested for hiding property from my husband's estate." "Did you believe him?" "I did not know what to believe." "Why did you not tell me?" "Because you looked at me as though I might become someone again." Della turned toward her. Nola's face was wet with tears. "I could not bear to watch that change," she said. Della felt anger. Hot, painful anger. She thought of the ruined cider, the lost hours, the danger to the farm. Then she saw Nola's thin shoulders shaking. Merritt had found the most frightened person among them, and used her fear like a key. Della did not excuse it, but she understood it. "Do you still have anything he gave you?" Della asked. Nola wiped her face. "Letters. What kind? Instructions. Questions. He told me to burn them. Did you?" "No." "Why not?" Nola looked toward the barn. "I think part of me wanted to be caught." Della took a long breath. "Bring me the letters." "Are you sending me away?" "No." Nola looked at her in disbelief. Della continued, "You will stand in front of the others and tell them yourself." "I cannot." "You can. They will hate me." "Some may." Nola flinched. Della softened her voice. "But they deserve the truth." Nola nodded slowly. "And after that, you help us finish this." Nola stared at her. "Why?" "Because Merit does not get to decide that one frightened choice is the end of your story." That night, Nola confessed. Clara shouted. Margaret walked outside and remained gone for nearly an hour. Inez sat in silence with both hands around a cup of tea. Ansel watched Nola with an expression Della could not read. When Nola finished, she placed Merit's letters on the table. "I am sorry," she said. Clara stood. "My wages depended on those barrels." "I know. You could have destroyed all of us." "I know. My mother is sleeping in my rented room because Fane closed her account at the company house." Nola began crying again. Della raised one hand. "Clara, no. She needs to hear it. She has heard it." Clara's face was red with anger. Della stepped closer. "You are allowed to be furious. You are not allowed to make Merit's cruelty our language." Clara looked at Nola. Then she walked outside. Inez picked up one of the letters. "This is useful." Nola stared at her. Inez continued. "He names the barrel. He mentions the permit before the county notice. He tells you to learn whether the farm can produce 50 jars before the mortgage deadline." Della looked at the papers. "Evidence." Ansel finally spoke. "Not enough." Della turned toward him. What would be enough? Proof he rejected sound apples deliberately. Proof he interfered with the county order. Proof the mortgage transfer was part of the same plan. Nola wiped her face. "He keeps records." "How do you know?" Della asked. "He said I owed him for every favor." "He wrote amounts in a small red ledger." Ansel's expression changed. "Where?" "In his office safe." Clara returned through the door. "I know the safe." Everyone looked at her. She continued. "I cleaned that office for 2 years before they put me on the packing line." Della shook her head. "We are not breaking into the cannery." Ansel said nothing. Della looked at him. "We are not. I heard you. You were thinking loudly." A faint movement touched his mouth, but his eyes remained serious. "There may be another way," Clara said. The cannery held its annual supplier meeting 2 days later. Farmers from across the valley attended because Merit announced new purchasing rates for the next season. Della had not been invited. Neither had any of the women working with her. They went anyway. Della wore her best repaired dress. Nola pinned her hair carefully. Inez carried a basket of last harvest jars. Clara brought copies of Merit's letters. Margaret carried a list of unpaid company debts and rejected harvests collected from 12 families. Ansel waited outside. The meeting took place in the cannery warehouse. More than 100 people stood between crates and packing machines. Merit spoke from a raised platform beside Judge Pell. When Della entered, conversation faded. Merit stopped speaking. "Mrs. Morrow," he said, "this is a private meeting. I supply fruit in this valley. You no longer have a contract. That is one reason I am here." Judge Pell moved toward the platform edge. "You were not invited." Della held up Merit's letter to Nola. Was this invitation private too? Murmurs moved through the crowd. Merit's face remained calm. "I have no knowledge of that paper." Nola stepped forward. "You wrote it." Merit looked at her. Something in his eyes made her shrink. Della moved beside Nola. "You told her which barrel to spoil. You knew about the county order before it was filed. You knew exactly how many jars we produced." Merit laughed lightly. "This is absurd." Clara passed copies into the crowd. Workers began reading. Judge Pell raised his voice. "These documents could have been fabricated." "That is true," Della said. The room quieted. Merritt seemed surprised. Della continued, "Which is why we brought more than letters." Margaret opened her ledger. 23 farmers had harvests rejected by your company in 4 years. 14 later lost their land after their mortgage notes were purchased by businesses connected to you. Merritt's smile faded. Business records are not crimes. No, Della said, but fraud is. Inez removed a sealed jar from her basket. This preserve was made from fruit your inspectors declared diseased. Judge Pell scoffed. That proves nothing. It was tested by the agricultural laboratory in the state capital. Della handed the official report to the nearest farmer. The apples had no internal blight, no soft rot, and no contamination before dumping. The room erupted into voices. Merritt turned toward Judge Pell. Della saw fear pass between them. Then a cannery worker near the back raised his hand. My load was rejected last spring, another voice called. Mine too. A third farmer pushed forward. Fane bought my mortgage 2 months later. Merritt struck the table with his palm. This meeting is over. No one moved. He looked toward the workers. Clear the room. The workers remained where they were. Merritt's face changed. For years, people had obeyed him before he finished speaking. Now they looked at one another instead. Della stepped closer to the platform. You told me poverty was weakness. Merritt glared down at her. You think a few jars and crying widows make you powerful? No, Della's voice carried through the warehouse. I think records make us difficult to erase. She looked toward the clerk standing near Merritt's office door, the same clerk who had been in Della's barn when the apples were rejected. He was holding a small red ledger. Merritt saw it, his face drained of color. The clerk walked forward slowly. My name is Samuel Orr, he said. I recorded the inspection. Merritt pointed at him. Put that down. Samuel's hand shook. The apples were approved the night before pickup. Judge Pell stepped back. Merritt descended from the platform. You signed a corrected report. You ordered me to. I ordered you to follow company policy. Samuel opened the ledger. These are payments to county officers. These are mortgage purchases. These are disposal orders. Merritt lunged for the book. Ansel appeared in the doorway. He did not move toward Merritt. He did not touch a weapon. He simply stood there. Merritt stopped. The entire room seemed to feel Ansel's presence. Della turned toward him. She had told him not to threaten anyone. He met her eyes. Then, very deliberately, he stepped aside and folded his arms. The path to the door remained open. Merritt could leave. He could also stay and answer. That choice was his. Della looked back at Samuel. Why bring it now? The clerk swallowed. Because Mrs. Morrow asked for one kind face when the apples were dumped. Della stared at him. Samuel's eyes filled with shame. I looked at the ground. The state investigation began within the week. The newspaper printed copies of the letters, the laboratory report, and sections of the red ledger. County officers denied wrongdoing until payment records appeared beside their names. Judge Pell resigned from the sanitation board. The bank froze the transfer of Della's mortgage while the court reviewed the case. Merritt Fane remained free during the investigation. That frightened Della more than she admitted. Twice, someone rode past the farm after midnight. Once, a dead crow was left on the gate with a note that read, "Heavy things sink." Della burned the note. She did not tell Nola. She told Ansel. He read the ashes in the stove. Do you want me to stay near the house? Yes. The answer came quickly. Ansel looked at her. Della felt embarrassed by how much relief his presence gave her. Not inside, she added. I did not assume inside. There is a cot in the barn. I have slept in worse places. I am sure you have. He stayed. At night, Della sometimes saw him through the kitchen window, sitting near the barn door with a cup in his hands. He never entered without invitation. He never asked for more than supper and a place to sleep. One evening, she brought him coffee. The air smelled of pine and distant snow. Ansel accepted the cup. You should rest, he said. So should you. I am resting. You are watching the road. That is restful compared with rebuilding a roof. Della sat on an overturned crate. For a while, they listened to the night insects. Then she asked, What happened to your mother? Ansel stared into the coffee. She went east, wrote twice, then stopped. Did you search for her? For years. Della waited. I found her grave outside a textile town, he said. She had died 6 months before I arrived. I am sorry, Ansel nodded. She kept 1 jar from the preserving house, mountain pear syrup. The woman she rented from gave it to me. Did you open it? No. Why? I told myself I was saving it. For what? He looked toward the dark orchard. I do not know. Della thought of Caleb's coat. Sometimes we keep things because opening them feels like losing the person again. Ansel turned toward her. Yes. The word held more emotion than a speech would have. Della looked at his scar. People fear you. They have reasons, do they? I have done things I regret. So has everyone in this valley. Not the same things. You did not burn the warehouse. No. You did not kill anyone. No. You let them believe the worst to protect your brother. Yes. That sounds less like danger and more like grief. Ansel's eyes held hers. Those can become the same thing if a person carries them long enough. Della understood the warning. It was not about what he might do to others. It was about what sorrow had done to him. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. Ansel became perfectly still. Della nearly pulled away. Then his fingers turned beneath hers, not closing, simply meeting her palm. The moment was quiet. There was no dramatic promise, no demand, no sudden claim, only warmth. A horse sounded on the road. Ansel withdrew his hand and stood. Della felt the loss of contact more sharply than she wanted to admit. The rider was a messenger from the state court. The mortgage transfer had been declared part of a fraudulent pattern. Della's original loan was restored, and all late penalties connected to Merritt's interference were suspended. But the principal remained due. Della had 4 days to make the payment. The investigation saved her from losing the farm unfairly. It did not create money. The last harvest order from the railway hotel would cover more than half. Smaller sales covered another part. They were still short by $380. Della counted the cash 3 times. The number did not change. We can sell the mule, Margaret said. It belongs to Inez. I can sell it, Inez replied. No, Della said. Clara offered her wages. Nola offered Caleb's old silver watch, which Della had once given her to use for timing the kettles. No. Della looked around the barn. This farm will not be saved by taking the last thing each of you owns. Then how? Clara asked. Della looked at the remaining jars. We sell what we made. To whom? Margaret said. Every buyer nearby is connected to Fane. Then we stop selling nearby. The next morning, the women loaded every jar into 2 wagons and took the northern pass toward the railway line. Ansel guided them. Snow had begun falling at higher elevations. The road narrowed between steep slopes. Wheels slipped on frozen mud. Twice, they had to unload the wagons and carry crates by hand. Near sunset, they reached the railway hotel. The chef had expected 50 jars. Della brought 183. He stared at the crates. I cannot buy all of this. Then let us sell to your guests. The hotel does not allow outside merchants in the dining room. Della looked through the glass doors at travelers drinking tea beneath electric lamps. Does it allow stories? The chef frowned. An hour later, Della stood in the hotel parlor beside a table filled with jars. She had never spoken to wealthy strangers. She had never sold anything beneath a chandelier. Her repaired dress felt painfully plain. Ansel waited near the back wall. Inez stood beside the samples. Clara handled money. Nola arranged the labels. Margaret watched the door, as though expecting Merritt himself to appear. Della looked at the gathering guests. Then she began. These apples were called worthless, she said. They were dumped on my farm because a powerful man believed ruin would make me sell. The room quieted. Della held up a jar. He was wrong. She told them about the orchard, the flood, the failed barrel, the women who came to help, and the old preserving house in the mountain. She did not hide her grief. She did not make herself smaller. She did not soften the insult Merritt had thrown at her body. A man told me a woman built like me could not save the land, she said. He thought shame would be heavier than 12,000 pounds of apples. Della looked around the room. It was not. The first guest bought 2 jars. A woman traveling from Chicago bought 12. A hotel owner from the next state asked about a winter order. By 9 o'clock, every jar was sold. They counted the money in a storage room behind the kitchen. Clara laughed first, then Nola. Margaret sat down suddenly and covered her face. Inez looked toward the ceiling. I told you the mud was expensive. Della counted the final bills. They had enough. Not much more, but enough. She turned toward Ansel. He was standing in the doorway. You knew this might work, she said. No. You looked very calm. I was terrified. Della laughed. Ansel's face softened. You did this, he said. We did. You led it. She looked down at the money. For a long time, I thought leading meant never letting anyone see me afraid. What do you think now? I think it means walking forward while everyone can see it. The mortgage was paid the next afternoon. Della carried the money into the bank herself. Half the town stood outside. Some had come from curiosity, some from guilt, some because they had read the newspaper. Owen Pike, the man who joked that Della could eat her way through the apples, stood near the steps. As she passed, he removed his hat. Mrs. Morrow. Della stopped. Owen looked at the ground. I said things. Yes, I was trying to be funny. You were trying to be safe. He looked up. Della continued. You thought if everyone laughed at me, no one would look at your fear. Owen swallowed. I am sorry. Della studied him. I believe you. Relief entered his face. Then she added, believing you are sorry does not mean I will forget what you did. His relief faded. Della walked into the bank. The clerk stamped the mortgage receipt. Paid. The sound of the stamp was small. Della had expected thunder. Instead, there was only paper, ink, and her own breathing. She touched the word with one finger. Caleb's farm was safe. When she returned outside, the women waited on the steps. Nola held the receipt. Clara lifted both hands and shouted. The crowd cheered. Della smiled, but tears filled her eyes. She turned away from the crowd and saw Ansel standing across the street beneath the awning of the general store. He did not cheer. He placed one hand over his heart and bowed his head. Della understood. That evening, they gathered beneath the oldest apple tree on the farm. The first snow lay lightly across the branches. Lanterns hung from the fence. Inez brought stew. Margaret brought bread. Nola made a pie from the last unbruised apples. Della stood before the women with a set of papers. The farm is safe, she said. But the next woman may not have a hidden preserving house or a red ledger. Clara nodded. So, we build something that does not depend on luck. Della unfolded the papers. The Last Harvest Cooperative, owned by every woman who works in it. 1 vote each. Shared equipment. Shared legal help. Shared storage. If a buyer rejects one woman unfairly, the rest stand with her. Margaret read the first page. You wrote rules. Inez wrote rules. Inez lifted her cup. Civilization is mostly rules, written by people tired of being cheated. Nola touched the line where her name would go. Do you still want me in it? Della looked at her. You told the truth when it cost you something. That matters. Nola's eyes filled. Clara stepped beside her. I am still angry. I know, Nola whispered. Clara handed her a pen. Sign anyway. One by one they signed. Della Morrow, Inez Calder, Nola Vey, Clara Bell, Margaret Sloane. When they finished, Ansel remained near the fence. Della carried the paper toward him. You did not sign. I am not a woman. That is your strongest legal argument so far. A quiet laugh moved through the group. Ansel looked at the names. This belongs to you. You helped build it. I gave you a road and an old building. You gave us knowledge. You would have found another way. Perhaps. Della met his eyes. But we found this way. Ansel looked toward the orchard. What do you want from me? The question was careful. Della understood that he was asking more than whether he should sign a paper. She looked at the man who had lived outside the valley. because people preferred a frightening story to a complicated truth. She thought of the warmth of his hand beneath hers, the coffee by the barn, and the way he stepped aside in the cannery, so her voice remained the center of the room. "I want you to stay through winter," she said. Ansel's eyes searched her face. "At the farm, there is work. There is always work. And after winter," Della continued, "we decide about spring." A faint smile appeared. "One season at a time, one decision at a time." Ansel nodded. "That seems fair." Della held out her hand. He took it. The others politely pretended not to watch. Spring came slowly to Bellwether Valley. Merritt Fane was charged with fraud, bribery, and unlawful interference with agricultural contracts. Judge Pell faced charges of his own. Several farmers recovered land lost through false rejection claims. The produce company did not disappear. Buildings rarely carried the guilt of the people inside them. Under new management, the cannery reopened and offered contracts with public inspection rules. The Last Harvest Cooperative refused the first offer. They accepted the second after adding their own terms. Della's orchard bloomed. White flowers covered the southern slope, including the little tree Caleb had kissed her beneath years before. She stood there one morning with her hands in the pockets of a new work dress. The dress was still simple, but it had no patches. Ansel approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You are staring at the tree," he said. "I do that." He handed her a cup. The farm below them had changed. The cider shed had been rebuilt. A new press stood inside. Women arrived each week with berries, pears, damaged fruit, and stories they once believed were endings. Nola managed the accounts. Clara supervised the machinery. Inez developed preserves that tasted better than her descriptions suggested. Margaret negotiated prices so fiercely that buyers began arriving with extra money prepared. Della led them. Some days, leadership still frightened her. Some mornings, she woke expecting the bank notice, the ruined field, or Caleb's final breath. Grief had not vanished simply because justice arrived. It had changed shape. Ansel stood beside her. "Your husband planted this one?" he asked. "We planted it together. He chose good ground. We both did." Ansel looked toward the blossoms. "I opened the jar." Della turned. "Your mother's syrup?" He nodded. "When?" "Last night." "How was it?" "Terrible." Della stared at him. Ansel continued. "It had been sealed for 26 years. She began laughing. He smiled. "I expected memory to preserve the taste." "Memory is not known for accurate recipes." "No." He looked at her. "But I was glad I opened it." Della understood. She touched his arm. Did it feel like losing her again? A little. And the rest? Like letting her leave the grave. The wind moved through the blossoms. Della looked down at the farm. "I washed Caleb's coat." Ansel said nothing. "I have kept it exactly as it was for 3 years. Yesterday, I washed it and folded it into a chest." "How did that feel?" "Terrible." Ansel nodded. "And?" Della looked toward the open kitchen window, like making room. Their eyes met. There was no sudden kiss beneath the blossoms. No promise large enough to frighten the future. Ansel placed his hand near hers on the tree branch. Della moved her fingers until they touched. That was enough. Below them, a wagon came up the road. A woman sat alone on the front bench. She was broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and dressed in black. 2 children rode beside her. The wagon bed carried crates of bruised pears. Della walked down to meet her. The woman climbed down slowly. "Are you Mrs. Morrow?" "I am. They said you buy fruit other companies reject." "Sometimes." The woman looked toward the cooperative buildings. "My husband died in January. The buyer says the pears are too marked. The bank says they will take the farm." Her voice shook. "I do not know what to do." Della looked at the fruit. Many pears were bruised. Some were damaged. Most could still be used. She thought of 12,000 pounds of apples rolling down the mountain. She thought of rain, laughter, failure, fear, and the word paid stamped on a small piece of paper. Then she looked at the woman. "Your situation is serious," Della said. The woman lowered her eyes. "But it is not final." The woman looked up. Della opened the gate. Behind her, the press began to turn.